Hello and welcome to Talking Events, the event industry podcast brought to you by Event Industry News. This latest series of Talking Events episodes is being recorded from the Ticketscript offices in the heart of London's Silicon Roundabout district. Big thanks to the guys at Ticketscript for allowing us to set up the Talking Events studio in their offices and to record this latest series. On with today's episode. Understanding your consumer through data. Joining the podcast today, Ticketscript's Shane Mansfield. Good morning, Shane.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And James Cobb from Crowd Connected. Good to see you again, James.
Good to see you. Good morning.
Guys, in a nutshell, before we plough on with today's topic, let's talk a little bit very quickly just about your respective organisations so that our listeners today understand exactly where you're both coming from. Shane, let's kick off with you. Tell us a bit about Ticketscript.
So Ticketscript is Europe's leading self-service ticketing technology, and we allow event organisers to set up ticketing for their own events. We're very much a data-led company, so what we're about is allowing event organisers to get data as people are visiting their site, as they're buying tickets, and then some of the data afterwards to enable them to grow their event and ultimately sell more tickets.
And James, Crowd Connected in a nutshell.
So Crowd Connected is all about location data. And we offer a service called Co-Locator to events. We grab location data from customers' mobile phones and from all sorts of other sources. We aggregate that. And what we're really about is less location-based services, marketing, understanding the individual, although we can produce all sorts of interesting insight about the individual. It's more about aggregating that information to understand the place, understand the event, understand the venue, see where queues are building up, and doing all of that in real time.
And so when we're talking about understanding our consumer through data, what we're talking about is understanding the event customers. Are we right in saying that?
Yeah, I would say so. That's exactly the way I would look at it, is that basically the way I see things is that we live in a data-driven age at the moment particularly, and I think the more we can know about a ticket buyer, an event goer, the more easy it's going to be for the event organiser to tap into that market and grow their event.
How far down the line are we? I mean, I just want to go back a few years to begin with, and when people really started talking about using data to understand their customers and the generation of data, and it really is quite a recent thing, really, to be generating the sheer volume of data that we're generating as a whole, not just in the events industry, but collectively as a consumer marketplace. How have we progressed from where it started to where we are now in understanding data, and how much more can we progress from here forwards? James?
Well, the importance of data has been around forever. It's interesting. More than once now, I've done presentations or been at meetings about data, and people reach for their PowerPoint for a quote that actually is Sherlock Holmes. So this is not the computer age. They're not quoting the founders of Google or Facebook. They're quoting Arthur Conan Doyle, saying, data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay or something like that. So the importance of data has been there forever. What's changed is the amount of data. So that's where this expression big data has crept in. And big data is a very valuable concept, but it's a term that's become horribly overused to the point where probably no one knows what it means. So it's really important to start splitting big data down and saying what is big, and the volume is big. So typically at an outdoor event, at a festival, we can be collecting many tens of millions of data points about people's movement and location around that event. So typically 60, 70, 80 million data points will collect at a single event. So the volume of data is big, and the velocity is big as well. So our system is having to cope with thousands of updates a second from devices. So you've got this huge velocity, this huge volume of data, and that's difficult to deal with, difficult to make sense of, difficult to know exactly what to do with it, because you can do so much with it. But that's what's changed: the volume and the velocity, and realizing what you can do with it, not the concept that data is a useful thing.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. In that, as I said, that the big data as a term, I think it's misused now. It's out of place, because it is just about data, but it is getting something useful out of that data. And I think that's where the hardest part comes in, especially from our experience with the smaller event organisers that come in, is that they know they should be using data. They know how to get the data through Google Analytics and sources like that, but then they don't know how to get the useful nuggets out of that data to then actually help them.
And what are those useful nuggets? What sort of data are we talking about that can be of use? Is it something as simple as an email address? Obviously, people want email addresses so they can market outwardly towards their customer base, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, email addresses, so that I suppose you've got to break the data down a little bit. I mean, the email address and customer information down to an individual, that's useful for, as I said, emailing and contact strategies. But I think even before that, when you've got people coming into your site and you can see what type of devices they're using, whether it's mobile, whether it's tablet, what websites are actually driving them to your site, which ones convert better than others. It's those types of bits of information that will then allow you to create marketing campaigns and contact strategies to actually increase event attendance in the first place. And then once you've got that event attendance, then you can use the email address data to make your next event more successful because you've got a captive audience.
And some examples of the things we're exposing to event organisers, once people are through the gate, we are tracking their movement, and every time I use the word tracking, I will follow it up and talk a little bit about privacy, because tracking just sounds scary. It's a scary word. What we're doing really isn't scary. It's quite the opposite, because what we do is take data about an individual, but in a completely anonymous way. Our system, I do not know who these people are. I don't know their name. It's anonymous data. Not only that, but we're aggregating the data. So what we expose to an organisation is percentages of people, queue times, dwell times, how many people did this. It's not an individual location. So it's not as if they could even reverse engineer the identity from the data by figuring out where someone lives. So it really is, we call that default mode of operating our privacy lock assurance, because not only is the data anonymous, but we're guaranteeing that we won't even tell the promoter, give them enough information about an individual for them to work out who you are. So we're tracking people on site, and the sort of things we can do with that, we can just from the location data start looking at the behaviour of the audience. So if we look at a typical outdoor festival, we see clear behavioural groups there. We see people who tend to spend all of their time at the main stage. They have very few visits to the other musical entertainment or the other activities on site. They'll hang at the main stage watching all the acts for pretty much their entirety, with the odd trip to the closest toilets and the closest bar. Now, those people, it's useful to know if the majority of your audience for a festival is that kind of person, or are the atmosphere absorbers, we call them, who seem to do a bit of everything. They don't spend a lot of time at the main stage. They're going around everything. They're catching a little bit of lots of acts. They see far more acts, but they see less of them. They spend a lot of time in sponsor areas, in food and beverage areas. Now, if you've got an audience that's predominantly the main stage hangers, you might think, well, hold on, is there much point for this event in spending a lot of time on social media trying to communicate with our audience, engage with them prior to the event, persuade them to buy a ticket? Because hold on, once we've announced the lineup for the main stage, that's probably all the information they need to make a ticket buying decision. If you've got a festival where it's the opposite, most of your audience are these atmosphere consumers who do a little bit of everything, it's probably far more important not to concentrate on the lineup, not to spend money on the acts, but to actually think about how do you communicate, how do you engage with prospective ticket buyers before the event to make them really understand all the fantastic things on offer. So that's an example of stuff we can do purely with location data. We can look at behavioural groups and segment the audience into those groups. We can also combine our data with personally identifiable stuff. So the sort of stuff Shane talked about, if we're looking at people's social media behaviour, the websites they visit, the music they listen to on Spotify, their band likes on Facebook. For a festival in the US, we, just looking at location, looked at people who had watched a particular act on a particular stage, and then said, let's look at those people and look at their online behaviour and see what other music they listen to. And the bookers absolutely love that. They say, well, if this is the kind of act we want to book for the main stage, what other stuff do these people like? And by combining online behaviour with offline behaviour, we can go even further in terms of demographic understanding as well as behavioural understanding on site.
Shane, a lot of what James was just talking about there is very much analysing what's happening once the event doors have opened and people are coming in. In terms of the data, and going back to talking about how we started generating data a few years ago and where we've got up to now, how have things changed in terms of your own operations and how much data and the type of data that you used to generate and where things are being taken to now?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, if you go back, I've been at the company now for 4 years, and if we go back to when I first started, as I said, it was enough to have basic email address and mobile data. There wasn't really much more beyond that. We wouldn't look at supplying analytics to clients. We wouldn't really look at the site stats in a great deal. And very rapidly it became apparent that actually that's something that event organisers want, and they want to know what their customer is doing, not only on their own websites, but what they're doing on the ticket shop as well. And it kind of mirrors what you were saying about on-site behaviour actually at the event. Is it similar that we now need to analyse, and we do analyse the on-site behaviour when customers on the website as well, because as I said, combining the two bits of information is really the most important part that event organisers are looking for. And in a similar way, we now allow our clients to look at their website, look at the data, and actually start to analyse which pages they go to, which ones they don't, and that helps segment them into, as you said, the atmosphere users and the people that are only looking for specific bits of information. And using that data, you can then create remarketing campaigns and stuff like that. And I think that's what's changed the most. Is it's the volume of data we actually have available and how we transmit that to the event organizer themselves. Where the challenge is the event organizer themselves having the time to get something useful out of that data, and that could be something that they do themselves or engage with a third party to.
Well, it's interesting when you say getting something useful out of the data. A lot of our listeners will be familiar with something like Google Analytics and the basic, overview screen, admin panel on Google Analytics, and you can see operating systems, a type of operating systems that people have used to access certain websites and certain pages. How can that specific strand of data actually be utilised effectively by an event organiser? How important is it that they understand what operating system or what mobile platform is being used to access their information, and how can that be flipped to then effectively market for future events?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I when I talk about this at conferences, I categorise it into two different types of data. You've got interesting data and useful data. Now, the interesting data is the stuff you look at and raise an eyebrow and go, oh, that's quite interesting. It raises questions, but it doesn't actually help you do anything for the bottom line. Whereas the useful data is the stuff you can act on immediately that will actually, help you drive more ticket sales and ultimately have a more successful event. Now, the interesting data is not valueless, because normally the interesting data itself will lead to a question that then makes you get some useful data. So it might be like, oh, more people are using Safari than are using Chrome. Okay, well, that in itself doesn't actually necessarily tell me anything, but then you ask yourself why, or why is that particularly happening, and that can lead you into the useful data. The useful data that's immediately available is stuff like referral source, because as an example, because that will then allow you to identify sites that maybe you weren't aware of. It could be potential media partners. Likewise, it could help you identify areas that you think maybe you're missing out on, because if you're expecting to see a particular site driving traffic and it's not there, that it raises those flags. So there's referral data is certainly one that's quite interesting. I think one of the first ones that a lot of event organisers and a lot of people generally overlook is the device one. So that's whether, and that's beyond operating system, but going into, is it a mobile, is it a tablet, is it desktop, and all that simply comes down to is site optimization. A lot of people would probably arguably save a lot of money and make more revenue if they focused on conversion rate optimization on their website rather than just spending lots of money on AdWords.
And we're talking about the actual event website
absolutely.
At this point,
yeah,
just
absolutely.
to clarify.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah. So, a very simple thing, it's the page behavior report. You can see which pages people are interacting with, which ones aren't, and what device they're actually engaging with them on, and then optimize your site to make it the experience better on that particular device, therefore creating better conversion and theoretically selling more tickets.
And even though there is a danger that it can get quite techy and quite involved, the beauty about the way that people can access something like Google Analytics nowadays and look at behavioural trends and where people are accessing it from is that it need not be an expensive service to deploy. You can actually access this data quite easily, even the smallest of events, can't they, James? You can access this type of data.
Yes, absolutely. The availability of data, the volume that's out there that people could have access to has increased exponentially, massively, but the availability has increased hugely as well, and that's a good thing, but it also does raise challenges, and we've already talked about the issue of people just having all of this data and not knowing, not understanding what to do with it. We talked about big data being a slightly tired phrase. Actionable is also a word I don't like to use because it's used far too much. But there is a real issue about whether stuff is actionable. And there's loads of stuff we can put in front of an event operator in real time that they love looking at. And that's the analog of the interesting data on Google Analytics. But you do start to wonder, what are you actually going to do with this? Is it really actionable? There is other stuff we can put in front of people, which is truly actionable. And we're starting to learn which are the truly useful bits and which aren't. And it's interesting when we've done debriefs with operational teams after events and asked them, what did you think of the data? They go, it was amazing. We were sat there in the production office glued to these dashboards showing us heat maps and all this stuff. And then I said, well, what did you actually do with it? When you looked at it, what did you do? And they go, well, I don't really know what we did. It was so much data, we didn't know what to do with it. So we are having to help people, to train them, to educate them as to what they can actually go and really do with the data rather than sitting and looking at pretty stuff.
And striking that balance, isn't it? Between generating loads and loads of data, but blinding people with so much of it that they can't really understand how to use it. Because not every event organizer is going to be as savvy or as or have the same ability to access the data and interpret it, are they?
No, I think that's exactly it. Is that we talked about it earlier as well about the volume of data, and for someone that may be aware of analytics and or any software package that delivers data, is typically you may get to like the log inside the dashboard, and there's a wealth of different reports and different data points and data sets that you can get hold of, and if you don't have the time or the confidence, it can become very unnerving for people that aren't used to dealing with data, and it's something that can then be off-putting. And I think, as you said about trying to guide people and teach people the best bits of data to look at, I think that's what we try and do as well, in that it's, from Google Analytics point of view, there's probably only 3 or 4 reports that you would look at on a regular basis, and if you did look at those reports, you're going to get some actionable and useful data to help your event. You don't need to be overcome just because a report or menu is there. You don't necessarily need to click on it and look at that data. It might not be that useful for that event organizer, and I think it's getting people over that fear that just because there's a lot of data there, it doesn't have to be scary, and you can get useful information out of it. You shouldn't be afraid of it.
Because they've been able to access this data, are there examples, and it's a bit of a strange question, but has this actually worked? Are there examples where, by being able to analyse the data, even in a simple way, you guys have seen examples of events be able to tweak their offerings and to actually improve what they do, either through ticket sales or interaction or whatever that may be, as a result of the data that's been captured?
Yeah, I mean, most of the examples I can give you are operational ones rather than marketing ones, but we've got some clear marketing examples as well. So for one festival, going back to 2014, they used the behaviour pattern of which act people had seen to then build segments to then send them notifications and offer them offer deals on other tickets to other shows. So if you're in a festival environment, you've got lots of different artists performing, and rather than picking one individual artist, they were able to build segments and say, look, let's build a segment of people, and let's take all our festival audience, the festival goers who saw this act on this stage but never visited this stage and went to this thing more than once. Let's build that segment, and now let's send them an offer to a show tomorrow at the O2. That's the kind of thing they can do. And it's the sort of thing people have been doing for a while online. People have visited this page and not visited that page, and have visited that website and like this on Facebook. Let's build a segment. But we're doing that in the real world. We're saying, actually, let's look at their behavior in the real world and build that segment. So it's on the marketing side. On the operational side, loads of examples, both in real time, people spotting issues with road crossings on egress, people getting advance warning of people arriving at a box office, seeing seeing them arrive at the metro station on our dashboard in real time, and getting some more staff ready, getting another scanning lane or security lane open before they arrive, because we can show them exactly how long it's going to take them to get there. Those operational examples, we could go on forever.
Fabulous. And Shane, Ticketscript, I'm looking at the Ticketscript logo as we speak, and the strapline is sell more.
Yep.
And it's a bold strapline, but I guess it wouldn't be there had you guys not built up a portfolio of examples to be able to demonstrate the fact that this data can have a positive impact and has had a positive impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the case. I mean, we went with that strapline because we obviously believed in it, and we have got the stats that show that our clients are growing year on year, which is what the sell more sort of philosophy is all about. And it is largely, at the moment, it's definitely through those event organisers very proactively taking on board the data side of the business. And I think the examples that we can talk about are very much, as you've mentioned already, the remarketing and retargeting type examples, where they'll look at shop behaviour. So we're able to build out steps and segments in their ticket shop so they can retarget those people in display. The other side of it as well is after the event, we obviously, all of the data that's collected in the shop is entirely owned by the event organizer, so it's theirs to access whenever they want, to download, to do whatever they like with it. And what we find is that they're getting a lot of success by uploading those email addresses into Facebook and creating the Facebook segments to target event organisers that have been, ticket buyers that have been to their event previously. So it is through that data that they're seeing the growth through Ticketscript, and mainly it is using the customer behaviour reports that we provide. So both after the event and before the event with the analytics data.
And in a similar way to James, where he was identifying the fact that by monitoring the actual movement trends and which artists or acts a visitor is engaging with at a festival or an event, for example, you can then use that, or the organiser could use that to promote another event featuring that particular artist. Presumably, if an organiser is using someone like Ticketscript for multiple events, they can match up their data from different events and look to see where the trends are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the examples, it's with a Dutch festival. They've identified people that are interested in, or visitors that are just interested in the lineup, and they're not quite sure, those group of people, they're not quite sure whether they're going to buy tickets yet or not. Based on the data we've seen, they've visited the site multiple times, they've only gone to the lineup page. They've created a campaign to auto-trigger once they update the lineup. Those people get a particular marketing message identifying that the lineup's changed or had an addition to it, because that's the driver that's going to make that group of people buy tickets. So that's the type of thing that we're looking at, is really coming into the data, and I like looking at the micro moments, because it's that you're going to get the incrementality. So we try and guide the event organizer to start looking at more micro moments and actually communicating on a micro level with smaller subsets, because then you're able to make a more personalised message.
So segmenting the data rather than using it to blanket bomb everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry to put that into sort of
that's exactly
brutal terms, but segmenting it and looking at the stuff that's maybe a little bit more niche within that data.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. There's some parallels there. We started right at the beginning talking about what's the history, how did all this data start, and if you look at the early data we had available, if we look online, was a page count. You remember we had those little ticker things that went round at the bottom of the page. You don't see those that often these days, do you? But it was a page count. How many visits am I getting? And similarly, if you look at offline, if you look at real world data, for a long time in retail, people have been using footfall count. It's not fine grained, but it just tells you by counting people who come through the front door, how many people came on Tuesday, how many people came on Wednesday, and there's a complete an analog there with a page count. Then we were able to look at individual page hits. How long did someone spend on the site, and which pages are they looking at? And now you can even track the mouse move and how long the mouse hovered over a certain thing on the page. So that granularity, that micro moment you can get into is getting finer and finer online, and exactly the same thing is happening in the real world. We're much better able to understand whether it's at events, whether it's retail. This year we're about to start a project with TfL looking at movement on London Underground. So it's not just about events, but in the real world we're getting better and better at understanding those, the real micro fine-grained behaviour, just as we are on a mouse click on a website.
Excellent. Guys, getting towards the end of today's episode, thank you for your input. I think what we'll do is we will tweet some links from the @TalkingEvents Twitter feed out to both your organisations. So anybody who's tuned into this episode of the podcast who may want to get in contact with any questions that relate to the stuff that we've been talking about today can do so. If you would like to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to it via iTunes. You can watch it via the Event Industry News website. You can also watch it via the Event Industry News YouTube channel. It leaves me to thank Shane Mansfield from Ticketscript for joining us. Shane, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
James Cobb from Crowd Connected, thanks for joining the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And you have been listening to Talking Events.